Hello, my name is Ben Jeanette, and I'm a training coordinator with the National Center for School Safety. And this is the Illuminating Insights into the School Threat Assessment Toolkit series. In this video conversation, we're joined by Dr. Joe McKenna to discuss how program evaluation can strengthen school threat assessment efforts. Thank you for joining me here today to share your expertise. Can you take a moment and introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, Ben, I'm super excited to be here, and thanks to the National Center for School Safety for putting this series together and inviting me to be a part of it. My background, I think, is a little bit unique, and especially maybe for this topic. My background first started as a researcher, more in the academic space, traditional kind of graduate school, and began studying, the issues of school safety from more of an academic lens. But the more and more I got into it, I really wanted to put myself in the field. And so I spend quite a bit of time here in Texas at our Texas School Safety Center, overseeing both our research divisions and our training division, which again continued just to excite me and really pushed me into wanting to be in a school setting. So I got the opportunity to start a safety program at a medium, largish, fast-growing district here in Texas, and kind of got to see that district grow and eventually oversaw operations as the deputy superintendent. But since then, I've kind of immersed myself in this idea of how do we use data and information to inform, the practices around school safety. So working a lot with, nonprofits around the country, different federal agencies through grants and different partnerships. But again, just something that is maybe easier said than done is how do we take this information that we get out of a program and use it to improve a program is really what I've focused most of my career on now, regardless of the area of school safety, whether it's emergency response or threat assessment. I think there's such a need for us to continuously evolve these programs. So that's really been the focus of my career in both the practical and research settings that I've been in.
Awesome, that's great to hear. And it's kind of common thread that it seems that experts in this area kind of start with research and then get into it because they develop a passion for it, and we
Yeah.
can see that. The School Threat Assessment Toolkit highlights that an important part of threat assessment is not just responding to situations as they arise, but also looking back to understand how well the process is working. This includes considering how plans are carried out, how students are supported over time, and whether outcomes are fair and consistent. With that in mind, why is it important for schools to build an evaluation system into their threat assessment efforts?
Yeah, it's something that I think as we evolve, as a collective around school threat assessment that we're kind of ready to pay attention to now. Obviously, there's some important steps that need to take place when you're building that threat assessment program. And we know these best practices, evidence-based practices from federal agencies and state agencies and national experts, things like building that multidisciplinary team and getting good training in that assessment model and understanding the process. All of those are important. I don't want to discredit those, but once we get that all set up and running, I think if you think about education in general, we do this often in everything we do, right? If we were to put a new math curriculum in place, we're going to train our teachers, we're going to get the right teachers in the classroom, and then we're going to put this math curriculum in place. It would be odd if we just didn't do anything after that, right? And oftentimes we're looking at maybe it's test scores or student performance or engagement, depending on what the goal is. And I think naturally, we sometimes forget about that maybe in the safety space. And we do so much work with a new mandate or a new requirement, and we get it all set up and we kind of just take a breath and we're like, okay, what next? And that really should be, let's look at our data. Is that case data, that's coming in? How, if our goal is to prevent violence, to support students, are we doing that? Does our case data suggest that we're doing that? And we can look at that, and sometimes it might not be. And I'd rather intervene earlier and make an adjustment to the program than just kind of letting it go and not be meeting that important objective of ensuring safety. But it also allows us to find areas that are working. If we have a really good team, I've done this at a couple campuses where I've had a really good team, an admin team that took to it, a counseling team that took to it. And it was so great to bring them in to do some professional development with other teams that were struggling. But I only knew that they were doing well by feedback that they were giving me, by looking at their cases, looking at their processes. Um, and again, it gives us both opportunities to improve as well as maybe replicate or enhance some of the strategies that we see working.
I think that's really important to kind of relate it to, like you said, the curriculum that might be brought into a school district. Yeah, you implement it, but you want to make sure that you're testing to make sure that the students are getting it or the staff is understanding what we're looking for in making sure the program is effective.
Yeah.
So, what should school officials keep in mind when conducting an internal evaluation or reviewing the fidelity of their threat assessment program?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. Fidelity and implementation is something that's really important to the work that I've done, both again as a researcher. Sometimes we don't look at fidelity, we just look at outcomes, right? And there can be an issue if fidelity is not there and we're not implementing the way we're assuming in our research and in our data, then the outcomes are really in question, right? In terms of what we're finding. I think the same is true of threat assessment, right? If we're not seeing the outcomes that we want, knowing the messy, complex, dynamic world that is education, it could be something in the process, right? And so rather than, maybe just chalking it up to this isn't working, threat assessment's not working for us, we're not, improving and we're not, supporting our students, is there something wrong with the process? Is there something about education, or that school campus that is a barrier to success? And I'll give you an example. Something as simple as I had a team that was just not doing well. We didn't see the outcomes that we were seeing in other campuses. And I sat down and I talked with this team for a while, and they said, we simply just can't meet. We're being pulled in so many different directions. We have that weekly or bi-weekly meeting, but this person's missing because they have some professional development, and this person is also part of this team, and they meet at the same time. And so it took us, my team at a district level to say, how can we free up their time to meet, right? That's part of our process and an important one that this team is going to meet on a regular basis. And if they can't, well, why would we expect the outcomes to be, what we would anticipate? And so I think it's really important as fidelity is one of the key things that, yes, we can look at our case data and our outcome data, and that's important. But don't underestimate talking with your teams. I did we were on 9 week cycles in Texas for grading. And I would reach out to my teams every 9 weeks with a 2 to 3 question survey. What are your barriers? What's working well, right? And if a common theme bubbles to the top across all 40 of my campuses, well, that's a me problem, right? That's a person who's overseeing this program problem. And how can I provide some type of relief so that that team can work towards the outcome? So I can't stress enough continuously looking at your process. And sometimes that's hard because oftentimes we're the ones that create the process, right? And we think, I took every best practice I could find from, Dr. Cornell and Marisa Randazzo and all these other folks, right, who have done so much great work in the area. And I've put these into practice. That doesn't mean that that best practice is going to work out in your environment, in your setting, the exact way you expect, right? And so I think we need to kind of have that emergency management culture that we see on the response side is continuously wanting to get better, right? We do drills and we do exercises to find where it's not quite perfect. And I think with threat assessment, we want to have that same mindset. Where can we just get that much better? To make sure, again, now connecting it back to those important outcomes that we're seeing the impact and the outcomes that we expect.
You kind of brought up a great point. When we create these systems, sometimes we're so involved in them that we may not be able to see some of the issues even through evaluation. In addition to internal evaluation, bringing an outside evaluator might be a key component of this process. What are some key considerations school officials should keep in mind when they are selecting an outside evaluator?
Yeah, and I think again, but not new to education, right? We do this in other areas, right? We have financial audits, we have curriculum audits from outside professionals. And I think that's healthy to do, right? We all have biases and we try to mitigate those. But I think, at a time that seems appropriate, right? You want to engage with some outside evaluator, I think can be beneficial. And I think you want to be careful in the selection of that outside evaluator, right? Someone who yes, has a good understanding of threat assessment, but also has a good understanding of schools, right? Because that's only going to help them and help you understand some of those potential barriers, right, that you're experiencing. Threat assessment is obviously much bigger than schools, right? And I think if you can find that evaluator that has that school experience, but also a deep understanding of threat assessment, I think that's step one. Step two, when you're looking at that kind of outside evaluator, is give them as much information as you can. I've been in the place where I've evaluated programs and district threat assessment programs. And I want to see your policy. I want to see your procedure. I want to see how you have it written down. And then I want to observe it. I want to meet with a team. I want to talk with a team. I want to see that process in practice because one of the things that I've seen a number of times, and there's been this mention in some of the after action reports of some of our school violent incidents, is writing it down conceptually is one thing. But putting that program and that process into practice is perhaps the hardest thing you'll ever do, right? We can bring in all the best practices, but actually getting, the more teams you have, I had up to 40, and they all, have their own uniquenesses, but I want to make sure that we used to call them guardrails, right? That those fidelity guardrails are on. And so having someone that again is willing to not just crunch some numbers, right, but really dive in and look at the process as well as the outcomes, right? Because we could have challenges in the process and we could have challenges in the outcomes. And I think to understand it holistically, we have to look at both. And then hopefully that evaluator is someone who you can engage after. That can make some practical recommendations, right? It's great for you to tell me that my program is doing great and or it's not. But someone that maybe can engage in some dialogue and where should we go next? What are some things that we can look at to improve our threat assessment program, get the outcomes that we want? And again, I think, finding that person, there's a handful of people out there who have done some great work and really dedicated most of their professional careers to school threat assessment. And so I think if you're going to embark on that outside evaluator, I think it's worth finding the right person who understands the process.
So some of our viewers might be in different parts of their implementation of their threat assessment system, from just looking at what kind of system they want to put in place to already having one in place. With that in mind, during what phases of implementation and ongoing threat assessment use in a school should the threat assessment program be evaluated?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, Ben, I would like to jump in and get this ingrained into my process as early as possible, right? Think about let's take the district out there, the school team out there that's just getting started. We often, maybe pass through this quickly, but let's sit down and talk about what our goals are. What are we trying to achieve with threat assessment? Yes, maybe in some states we now are required to do this, but really think about why are we doing this, right? And I think it starts there, right? Those goals then are going to drive what information do we need to collect? Are we going to do we have a paper pencil form? Is it collecting everything we need? Are we using a software program? Does it have all the fields that we need? Because it's great to have a goal, but if at the end of the school year you sit down and you say, okay, did we reach our goal? But you really don't have a way to determine that, kind of leaves you in this weird gray area, right? Where you're doing the work and you hope it's having an impact, but you really don't know. So I think that's really important too, is to set those goals, find those strategies, those data items that are going to help you. But then, if you are that district or campus that is already into this, maybe you've done it for a few years, um, nothing prevents you from stepping back for a minute and saying, okay, we're gonna add this to our data collection sheet or some of our process forms that we use, right? Regardless of what model you use or approach you use, there's an opportunity to gather information. There's an opportunity to reach out to your teams and say, hey, we're gonna just pause for a minute and have a discussion on what's been working and what's not working. I say this half jokingly, but any principal out there listen to this will probably relate to it. If something becomes hard and there's obstacles after obstacle for me to come around, I'm probably going to modify it to fit. I have 100 other things going on. I'm probably going to change it to fit my process. But if someone can help me work through these barriers, yes, I'm going to buy into it and I'm going to support the process. But I think, to sum it up, I think you can put this evaluation component in at any phase of implementation. It's a lot easier when you're getting started to have that from the beginning, but nothing prevents you from, again, like I said, just adding that as a new focus for this semester or next year or whatever it might be.
Understand that there are a lot of components to threat assessment, from the teams to what kind of data you're collecting and such like that. What are some key areas that schools should focus on when evaluating the effectiveness of their threat assessment program to help build that?
Yeah, I've alluded to this a little bit, but I'll kind of drive it home a little bit deeper here. I really think it comes down to two buckets, right? It comes down to outcomes and process. In the research world, we say impact evaluation or process evaluation, right? Oftentimes, if I'm looking at this from a researcher lens, I want to know the process is working or the process is being implemented the way I expect or the way we intend before I start to look at outcomes. Because I mentioned this earlier, if your teams aren't meeting and their outcomes are poor, you could, and you don't know that the team's not meeting, you can come to one conclusion and say threat assessment doesn't work, right? I have bad outcomes. Kids that are on this pathway are still escalating. We're still having violent incidents, whatever concerning behavior, right? But if I know the team's not meeting, I kind of question that outcome a little bit. And I say, well, maybe they're not having the outcomes. And maybe I compare them to another campus that is meeting and look at their outcomes. They're a lot better. Or, maybe team members have changed out and this new team only has half their members trained, right? That this other group wasn't part of the training at the start of our school year. Those things are inherently related to your outcomes, right? And so oftentimes, we want to look at that outcome data. States will collect it, right? Different reports you're required to submit, and it's important. And I think some of the assumptions made are that we're following the process, but internally, whether you bring someone in or do it in-house, I can't stress enough. Look at the process too. Talk with your teams, gather that data. Don't forget about your outcome data, but it gives you a little bit more confidence if you look at the process in your outcome data.
Just like with academic programs, with threat assessment, we want to make sure that all of our students are being treated the same and fairly. How can evaluation help schools identify and address biases or disparities in their threat assessment program?
Yeah, 100%. And it's always something that, whether it's a conference discussion or a presentation or training, that's always a topic that we touch on. And I think, it's related to the inherent nature of evaluation, right? And I could take the word evaluation out and I could use the word continuous improvement, right? We build this in so that I can see things, right? I can see trends that I like or don't like, or even I may not know that that trend is a good or bad trend, but at least it catches my attention. Without good data collection, I'm really just hoping, right? Hoping there's no disparities. I'm saying I trained folks that, do it this way, but at times, those things still might present themselves. It might not be an individual who's purposefully, looking at it in a negative way, but it could just be a result of the process. And if we're collecting that information, we can continuously see it, right? I would look at data on a weekly and a monthly basis. I had a dashboard that I could pull up and I would look at it. And I've seen campuses where, let's say, our special education population was overrepresented in a given month, right? Gave me the opportunity to reach out to that principal, reach out with one of our special education staff, not wait till the end of the year, right? But right in that month, there have been times where it was just an oddity and it just happened. But there have been times where there was a misunderstanding in our process, right? That intersection of special education and general ed, we had a process for how to handle certain issues, and that was misunderstood, by a particular campus or team. And I intervened and I was able to say, okay, let's retrain on this. And so I think, if you're really concerned about ensuring the fidelity and the fairness of your threat assessment program, data is a great way to keep your pulse on that, right? On a regular basis, as opposed to waiting until that kind of end of the year look at our data or even something bigger than 2 years, right? It gives you that almost just in time, right away kind of data that allows you to at least ask questions, right? You may not know why it's happening, but at least it allows you to see into the process in an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's great that it allows for that kind of quick response, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
before the end of the year, making sure that you have an understanding of what's going on and being able to address any issues that might have come up. We've covered quite a lot about this very intricate topic of evaluation and threat assessment. Is there anything further you'd like to add or emphasize that we haven't touched upon or already have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I would say that we really, hadn't talked much about was this is easier said than done, right? This takes effort, this takes work. It is it's another thing to do. But I can't stress enough about how important this is. If you're truly committed to a threat assessment program that, is going to support students who are showing concerning behavior or having struggles, if you want to increase safety in your campus, you have to commit to this piece of it too, because it's only going to make the program better, right? It's only going to make sure that all that the people resources and the financial resources that go into training and time that you put into your threat assessment program, adding this evaluation component and just embedding it in what you do is really going to make sure at the end of the day that all of those resources, time, financial, people are being used to the best of your ability. And most districts I know can relate that resources are tight. And why not make sure that we're putting our resources that they're having the impact that we want them to?
Well, thank you again for joining us today, discussing this topic. And
Yeah, no, like I said, I appreciate the invite to be part of this important conversation. Obviously, the toolkit has been out there and is an excellent resource, but again, just thank you to the National Center for School Safety and all the others involved in putting this together.
we again want to thank Dr. Joe McKenna for joining us today to talk about the topic of evaluation in your school threat assessment program and then its importance in not only understanding the outcomes, but also the process that goes into making sure that those outcomes are successful for all of our students. If you want to learn any further about school threat assessment programs and also evaluation in them, you can refer back to our School Threat Assessment Toolkit, which is located on our website at nc2s.org. Thank you again for joining us today,